Hello, it's Cryptolyze. I hope you are well this Monday, 20 November 2023. We meet today to talk BTC, to talk crypto, to talk news in which we are going to have a macro, which will be quite weak, cryptos which risk being perhaps a little less weak than expected, or in any case a small return of volatility. We explain all that now. As a reminder, you always have the possibility of having free access to the educational course, which is a 60-hour training course worth €400, which allows you to learn blockchain, crypto, investment, technical analysis, trading, everything to become profitable. Through 130 videos, 400 pages of guides, quizzes to find out where you are in your progress. And all for free. To have access to this lifelong training, simply use the platform of one of our partners. Everything is explained in the comments and descriptions. We're going to start with some meta news that broke. In this case, we have the dissolution of the division specializing in artificial intelligence, and more precisely, the venture part, which allows management of the allocation of funds, and it's in the overall restructuring of Meta. We know that Meta, since 2021, has been completely wrong about the metaverse part, about the artificial intelligence part. They cannot keep up. They are really very, very far from what is happening. And precisely, they need to restructure. They need, I also think, certainly to prune the workforce, that we risk having waves of layoffs which will occur, and that is at the same time normal given the evolution of Meta and GT. And what happened on the metaverse, on artificial intelligence, the delay they have fallen on technologies according to which they should have been ahead. So at some point, we will have to react quickly and strongly. Next to us, we have Fidelity, which wants to create an Ethereum ETF to compete once again with BlackRock. So we are in the dynamic where BlackRock is pushing, and behind, we classically have the small ones, in quotes, really in quotes, which follow behind, so we risk having a slew of ETF spot Ethereum. Namely that we already have VanEck 21 shares ARX, which is there. We will have HDX, we have Grayscale, which are present, and we also have Galaxy. So we will have BlackRock and Fidelity, which will arrive. So we are at 6 now, we will move to 7, and potentially to 8 in the long term, or certainly reach 10 again. And therefore we have new pressure at the SEC level on the fact of having complex financial products for cryptocurrencies at Validate. And the SEC, moreover, postponed Global X. So the Global X request for its spot BTC ETF, so it was pretty much priced. We already knew basically that it was going to happen. December 20, which is the new date for the ETF, the potential validation of the ETF. Once again, there is a good chance that it will be postponed again. And it's not because we had the idea, in any case, a certain number of Bloomberg analysts had the idea that there was a global validation between November 9 and 17, that happened again. We take a step back. Personally, I tend to tell you that we will leave the end of the year without validation, and even potentially. Beginning of the year 2024. Why not refuse to request a new document and then validate a little later? Once again, we have the ability to refuse or, in any case, delay for as long as possible. The only thing they cannot refuse now, at least as it stands with the elements they have already given, is the Grayscale ETF. It's the only one they can't refuse thanks to the mention that was given and the victory at the Grayscale Tribunal. And once again, it's about the mentions that have already been effective. If they can find a loophole, they can refuse it. So, once again, we know that it will be validated. The question is really about the camp, and that's where the focus really needs to be. Alongside, we will have the options which have completely exploded with this uncertainty around the camp. The camp of the validation of these ETFs, and we can clearly see the increase already since October. And we really see the acceleration since we started to have a lot of rumors about the validation of BlackRock, in which we necessarily have coverage. Options are generally a hedge to be hedged in relation to the positions that we currently have, and many people are in the process of hedging in relation to a probability of either validation or invalidation. And the more we will have a rumor, and therefore the more we are going to have an acceleration of BTC, the more we have a risk of having a flow opposite to what we are currently experiencing, and therefore people are in the process of hedging, and which is rather classic. At the macro level, we are going to have a week which will be quite empty. We will not hide it. We have the FOMC minute which will be distributed between Tuesday and Wednesday. Quite little movement, I think, linked to that. And then we are going to have Thanksgiving on the 23 and the 24 November. So for me, we are going to have really very little movement over this week, in any case, on the macroeconomics. In addition, we have a pricing which is being done on the probability from a movement in rates we can clearly see that we are not going move at all before at least March. I think I see the pricing being done in May or potentially even June if we continue to evolve in this direction. And that will be something to monitor, so a macro which will be relatively weak on this end of the year with the really very strong acceleration that we were able to experience here on the S&P 500. I explained it to you in particular in the video from Saturday, in which we returned to this acceleration, where it came mainly from NASDAQ. NASDAQ, moreover, where we made an upward acceleration on a monthly basis, which is quite extraordinary. And when we look at what happened on a weekly basis, we see clearly that we took in greater liquidity, but we did not manage to close above, so it will be a week which will be very important, which will mark either a possibility of decline, and therefore at that time we will clearly have an S&P 500, which will sink because the S&P 500 is held by Valertech, by the big giants and if ever in GT. We have a breather at the end of the year. We risk having a fairly strong break. Please note that as usual, Thanksgiving is a time of reunion. It is a moment which is strong in the USA in which people share the good times of this year, the problems they may have had, and also the good deals they were able to make. We know very well, for example, that in cryptocurrencies, when we arrive in a pre-Yule run phase, so we have had acceleration phases. It is possible that the week of Thanksgiving and the 2-3 days after, we will have an upward acceleration because people are talking about the profitability they were able to have at the level of crypto redemption, and in which, for example, talking about certain projects in which we will have people who have not invested, who will invest following these family reunions. Next to that, we have oil, which is still struggling. I think we are going to stay in these zones for a while longer. We have the dollar, which continues to sink. Still target, which we A102 to watch. Reaction to 102, which would actually potentially give sufficient acceleration to go and retest the 104, 105 important level to, in fact, potentially validate a range between 100, 200, 405 before having a real direction, which will be carried out on a much more global macroeconomy. Next to the BTC level, we are still in this compensation phase following the very strong acceleration that we have experienced. An acceleration which is mainly linked to the rumor of instant validation of ETFs, in which it was going to be shortly time. We really had the break of this resistance zone, which was thanks to this rumor in which we had a first acceleration, which was the false rumor, the real false rumor, which was relayed by a very large specialized media in crypto, in which then we had the continuation of the rumors which started to arrive with the validation that it was potentially going to happen very, very quickly or even faster than expected. And this bullish acceleration continued until we started to see a decline in the acceleration with the target that we have from 11 to 37,649. Therefore, Fibonacci target from this extension to this retracement. And we see that there we no longer have too many rumors, so we are in the process of consolidating price level, which is rather classic with behind a transfer of liquidity that we find on altcoins outside Ethereum. Ethereum, which has not had this expansion phase, which has really been lagging behind for some time. And so here we are going to talk about something that does not make us happy. If ever we were in buy the rumor, sell the news. There are several examples. There is an example that I like. It is LTC, which many of you have asked me at the same time. Behind in the comments and LTC, I don't analyze it because it's not a crypto that really interests me. But what is interesting to see is that we always have more on Litecoin. We still have this schematic, really. Buy the rumor, sell the news in relation to the halving. And that's systematic, really, every time we find ourselves in the same process in which we have a valuation. 6 months, 7 months before the halving, and then have a dump a few months before, or even to the halving itself. And in particular, the last phase of buy the rumor, it's these 2 weeks in June here. While as a reminder, during this period, we had just recovered from the SEC announcement on June 5th, so we were in something that was relatively complicated. Yet we had an LTC which was taking off talking about halving with a lot of news and rumors around halving, like it was going to be the revival of LTC. What is it? Happened by... What's next once we've broken the upper levels? People started to take their profit. We then had a phase of people who simply dumped their bins, who had bought in this zone, saying, okay, we are preparing for the halving. saying that it will explode. We see what happened. People simply gave up and sold at a loss, and there we find ourselves in a retest, which is rather classic. That's a classic example of buy the rumor, sell the news. Okay, now do the same thing with what's happening on BTC, except you're taking away something that's important that we have in LTC, that there's a date. Something that we also have in Ethereum, when we had the merge, a date. Something that is recorded in which this is it. This date is going to happen. We know it's going to be at that moment. We don't have it, and that's complicated, and that's why we can continue to push relatively high as long as we don't have validation of the date. And from the moment you see where we will have a validation of the date, it is very likely to have a breath, either a lateralization or a breath, which is at the same time classic, in which we actually have an interest by saying to yourself, it's good, it's going to be tomorrow. Imagine that saying that validation is going to happen tomorrow, and that has been happening every day for several weeks overall. It's tiring. It's something that will have an impact, and people will not have the same reaction. It's the same principle. Take the test with a friend. So, for example, take a friend who loves Disney. You're going to tell him, listen, we're going to go to Disney. I'm offering you Disney. And you don't tell him when. And every night you tell him, maybe tomorrow we'll go to Disney. You will see that the hype will be very strong at the start. Is much, much less strong when we continue to do that. And even when the person goes to Disney, we will not have the same hype at all, and the person will be borderline jaded to go there compared to what he felt emotionally and the emotional shock he had. It's something that's classic and that's human. And it's the same principle why we also have such a reaction regarding the possibility of rumors. Because we had the false rumor, and when we saw the false rumor, we saw a candle that made more than 10 at once. And people are anticipating that potentially when we have the news of validation, we will still have a candle which will perhaps not be 10, but perhaps 20 or 30 at once. And obviously, it is the anticipation of what can happen, which means that we have this bullish acceleration here, apart from a big short squeeze in which we had a lot of people here who have tried to short throughout this acceleration. However, what is certain is that we have broken the very important 32,000 zone that we have been waiting for some time, and that we are well within a stabilization phase currently. Are we in a phase of retesting or reacceleration? What will it mainly depend on? Rumors, and not necessarily course. Besides, we have a volatility which is in the process of decreasing over the last 2 days, which is rather NGT. Classic with short-term breathing. We can clearly see that we have a volume hole which is below 32,000 following the very strong upward acceleration that we have had, and clearly we have very little volume. The movement was really very strong because the order calendar was very, very empty at that time. And in the short term, we see that over the last few days, since mainly Friday, since we had the bearish breakout, we are in a phase of consolidation and compression of and GT. Liquidities, which is rather classic, in which classically following a Friday evening, we will liquidate these parts before having a bearish breakout and go to liquidate these zones. And moreover, on the order flow, we see that the open interest is still relatively low. We have a small reaction at the level of the top traders. Personally, I will see it more, like a reduction in CF shorts, the people who were liquidated on this small upward acceleration. And when we look at a small and GT, we can hardly see that we consolidated liquidity up to 38,300. We consolidated liquidity up to 35,000, which is rather classic following a form of uncertainty and compression. So to prepare for a next movement, it's rather classic compared to what we know. In terms of liquidity on Kingfisher, interesting to see that we still have a big pool of liquidity there. At the bottom, once again, the question you have to ask yourself, it's not because there is liquidity that we go there, because we have liquidity at the top and we have liquidity at the bottom. What determines whether we go up or down? Overall, what is the interest of the market and market makers in going to a specific location? Is there any interest in returning, potentially retesting the 24,000? Is there any interest for market makers? Who are the market makers? And what is the will of these market makers? We already have the whales, we have certain stocks, and we are going to have, for example, the exchanges. And what is the will of these actors? And where do they wish to go and bring the prize? Clearly, currently, there is no point in going lower, breaking lower as long as we do not have the sufficient trigger to bring us bearish. Even if we see a CVD which is falling since we reached this peak, it is not because we have fallen that we could not have a reacceleration. If we look closely at the CVD perp, therefore which is the perpetual of futures, we can see that we have not broken this low. while clearly the spot we are sinking. So that means that the movement is mainly driven by an aggressiveness of futures, and therefore behind it, possibly a continuity of squeeze whatever and GT. Long or short, no matter what happens, we could very well have a re-acceleration and reset this top there in terms of aggressiveness, and have here a spot aggressiveness, which would be much more moderate, which would fade away little by little because overall people do not aggressively buy this market in spot. And that is quite simply the CVDs which show them to us. And these are CVDs which are consolidated on all the exchanges, and that is why I really like this tool that is Kingfisher. We're finished for today. I hope you liked this video. If so, don't forget to leave me a like and a comment. It always makes me very happy, and we'll see you later to 1330 for Access, the crypto of Axie Infinity.